there was a famous lecturer who was trying to talk about the origin or how to confront bullying. Now, the idea that he was presenting was that bullying is not about what they say, it's about trying to establish dominance. That when somebody is bullying you, or somebody accuses you of something, or somebody tries to debate you or argue with you, and it's not a logical thing that you can't respond with logic, you're trying to establish a sense of dominance to throw you off track and throw you off course and make you unable to like you basically lose a sense of who you are. You lose your natural faculties of being able to respond with logic or wit. They're just throwing you off course. And that's why, bullying usually includes language that is very derogatory and very demeaning to like shock your system into like, how do you respond to that? And he gave two examples. I forgot the name of this lecturer, but he gave two examples. The first example was where he had somebody from the audience come on stage, and he told them to call him an idiot. It was a woman, and she said, "Call me an idiot, bully me like as if we're in high school." And the woman went ahead and started bullying him. I hate your face. You're terrible. You're ugly. You're an idiot. You're this. And the lecturer responded as most victims of bullying would respond. No, you're not. Like, you're an idiot, or you're disgusting, or you're terrible, or trying to like respond in kind, and demonstrated how, as the victim, he always would lose. The victim of bullying would always lose in that dominance fight. We're talking about a vocal or verbal abuse, not a physical abuse. That's a different story. So, but then he asked that same volunteer to call him an idiot again and start bullying him again. And the way he responded was, instead of saying like, "No, I'm not," like, or, "Who are you to call me an idiot?" Like, instead of responding the way a victim might respond, "Yeah, yeah, you're right. I might be an idiot. I've done some stupid things in the past." And then the bully starts the actress, or the volunteer who was on stage, started like, "Well, yeah, of course you are. You're an idiot. You do dumb things. You do stupid things." And he's like, "Yeah, we established that already. And you know what? Even though you say that about me, I'm still going to be nice to you and kind to you. I still think you're great. You're awesome." And basically using the attempted dominance against the bully to throw the bully off course. And in the end of the conversation, the victim ended up being the one on the high road, the one who actually walks away with pride, being able to hold their own. His point is that how we understand the conversation when somebody is trying to demean us or hurt us or bully us or gaslight us, whatever you want to call it, how you allow it to affect you and how you hold your own is crucial to having a successful conversation. Now, what happens in this week's parsha, that this is why we're talking about this now, is a classic example of this, but it's something that holds true not just in a bullying or accusatory and defensive or gaslighting kind of way, but also in a spiritual sense, in a spiritual relationship sense. So the story itself is a very difficult story to read, and it's not for the faint of heart. I'm not going to read it in the text. You're welcome to read it, but it is when Balak, the king of Balak, who hired Bilam to curse the Israelites, and it failed because Bilam, towards the end of our parsha, not towards the end, but the second half of our Torah portion, Bilam goes on and blesses the people because he is only able to say what God puts in his mouth. Eventually, he came up with another idea to send the women of Moab into the camp with their idol called Baal Peor, and unfortunately, they were able um, to uh, entice many of the Israelites to sin and do things against the Torah and what they were commanded to do. And unfortunately, it led to a plague as punishment, which was just very unbearable. Now, the leader of the tribe of Shimon, his name was Zimri. And Zimri approaches Moshe with one of these women, who was actually a princess. She was the daughter of the king of Balak. And she was beautiful apparently, and he brings her to Moshe and says, "Could am I allowed to marry this woman?" And Moshe said no, because they were at that point, the Torah forbade them from having relations with those nations. And Moshe Moshe didn't answer, but his response was, um, Zimri's response to Moshe, even before he had a chance to answer, was, if you even try to tell me that I can't marry this woman, who gave you permission to marry Zipporah, the daughter of Yisro, who was not a Jewish woman, who was also from the land of Moab? So you're in no place to tell me that who I can and can't marry, before Moshe had a chance to respond. But let's examine this story a little bit. So the Talmud gives us some background and some details from the Medrash about what exactly happened. So what did Zimri do? Now Zimri was the leader of the tribe of Shimon. He was not some random dude. He was one of the main leaders of the Jewish people. So he arose and gathered 24,000 of Israel and went to Cosbi. Cosbi was the princess of Midian, and she said to her, marry me. And she said to him, I am the daughter of the king, and so my father commanded me I should only marry. I'm saying submit because submit. I'm saying marry because submit is a bad translation. It's not what it says. Um, it says tishmi, which is more like a relationship thing. So she says, I can only submit to the greatest of them. So he said to her, I too am the head of a tribe. He was the head of the tribe of Shimon. Moreover, I am the greater than Moshe because I am the second son. I'm the second descendant, and I'm from the tribe of Shimon, who was the second of the tribes. Reuben was the first, Shimon was the second, and Moshe was a descendant of Levi, who was the third child of Yaakov. So, however that works, that was his proof to her that he should marry her, or she should marry him. Sorry. Then Zimri took her and brought her to Moshe and said, "Son of Amram, is this woman forbidden or permitted? And if you even say that she is forbidden, who permitted the daughter of Yisro to Moshe?" And the Talmud says that basically Moshe was silent. The law was forgotten to Moshe, and he wasn't able to answer, or he wasn't able to give him an answer right away, and he remained silent. All of the leaders of Israel, when they witnessed this fact that Zimri, who was openly sinning in front of the entire nation of Israel and was challenging Moshe, not even giving him a chance to respond, and Moshe was basically stunted. He was completely silenced. All the leaders of Israel began weeping because they, to see the leader of the Jewish people, Moshe, being in such a situation is probably very painful. What happens afterwards is where the gory part. That's where Pinchas goes and kills him. Let's not focus on that part as much, because the point we want to talk about is this conversation with Zimri and Moshe. So, from a logical perspective, Moshe knew the Torah backwards and forwards. Moshe knew not just the Torah, but all the laws that were given throughout the generations in the Mishnah and the Talmud, the Sanhedrin, the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, the Kabbalah, the Medrash. Everything was all given to Moshe at Mount Sinai. Moshe knew it all. In fact, as we learned last week, Moshe was the only one who understood the laws of the red heifer. Now, no one, not even King Solomon, was smart enough to understand the reasoning behind the red heifer. Moshe was the only one. So something like this is something that halacha, Jewish law, easily could answer. What is the answer? How was Moshe allowed to marry Zipporah? Because it was the giving of the Torah, and the Jewish nation was not established until the giving of the Torah. In other words, the laws of what it means to be a Jew was not where we all became converts at the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So anything before that was what we were descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, but we were not necessarily in the covenant until the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So as long as Zipporah converted at Mount Sinai with everybody else, then she became permitted to be married to Moshe, just like she was permitted to be married to Moshe beforehand, because before the Torah was given, the laws of not marrying outside of the nation of Israel were not in existence yet. So that's in a simple way that's a very simple way to understand the law, but it is the law. So Moshe could have easily responded to Zimri with logic and with proof of how he was allowed to be married to Zipporah, and why Zimri was not allowed to marry someone who had not converted to Judaism or has not accepted the covenant on Mount Sinai. So now, there's more to this conversation as far as the halachic side of it, but let's look at it from a ripple effect domino approach, because Zimri was a leader of a tribe, but he was also a respected leader of the entire nation. In fact, it says he gathered 24,000 people. Someone who could gather 24,000 people has to be an influential individual. So his public display of rebellion against God's laws was not just an act of rebellion and defiance, but it was actually had a ripple effect where many others followed. And unfortunately, that's what led to the plague and what led to a lot of suffering that came afterwards. So it wasn't just about Zimri himself and this Cosby princess. It was a demonstration in front of the entire nation of Israel and would have an impact on the lives and on the future of the entire nation. So Moshe's response wasn't just about Moshe's legitimacy versus Zimri's legitimacy. It was relevant to the entire nation. So there's other halachic implications as to why Zimri could have challenged Moshe and why it would have been hard for Moshe to answer. So, for example, I'm not going to read all this text, but for example, Moshe was considered, according to some, a Kohen Gadol, a high priest. In other words, even though Aaron was the high priest, but because Moshe had permission to go into the Holy of Holies and talk to God face to face, he had the status of a high priest, of a Kohen Gadol, yet, but his children didn't. Aaron, on the other hand, his lineage all have status of a Kohen. Moshe was the singular individual who had the status of a high priest, but his children didn't even have the status of a Kohen. That's according to some. Now, in Jewish law, a Kohen, someone who is a descendant of Aaron, is not allowed to marry a divorced woman and is not allowed to marry a convert. A high priest is not allowed to marry those either, but he's also not allowed to marry a widowed woman. There's the reasoning for this we could talk about, we could explain, or at least we could try to explain, but that's the law of a Kohen. So if you say Moshe is a Kohen Gadol, he's not allowed to marry a convert, technically. And since Zipporah is considered to be a convert, then how is Moshe allowed to be married to Zipporah? And I know that we didn't have that on the screen just now, but we're going to go to it. So according to the Rambam and according to the Code of Jewish Law, so because the status of Moshe was not a high priest until after he was married, but because he was already married to Zipporah, he was allowed to stay married to Zipporah even once he had the status of a Kohen. Which means the reason why I'm going quickly through this is because halachically, according to Jewish law, there were answers to this. And let's just read this from the Talmud. Rav said, Moshe, our teacher, was a high priest and would receive a share of the offerings consecrated to heaven. In other words, only what a high priest is allowed to eat. And as it says, it was Moshe's portion of the ram of inauguration. Priesthood only expired for Moshe's descendants, as it says, but as for Moshe, the man of God, the sons are named among the tribe of Levi. Yet it also says Moshe and Aaron among his priests and Shmuel among all that call upon his name. In other words, it's from the Tillim that Moshe is considered to be a Kohen, which would also preclude him from marrying a convert. So what's the answer to this? How can Moshe marrying a convert if he was considered to be a Kohen? So we have the Talmud answer this, that basically if a Kohen who's allowed to marry a widow, just a Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry, a high priest is not allowed to marry a widow, but a Kohen is allowed to marry a widow. So if a Kohen, someone who's a descendant of Aaron, married a widow, and after he married the widow, he was appointed to become the high priest, and now he's not allowed to marry a widow, because he's already married, he's allowed to stay married. So the same applies to Moshe, who before he was appointed to be the leader of the Jewish people was not a Kohen. So he married a convert. So once he became appointed and was elevated to the status of a Kohen and even a Kohen Gadol, he was allowed to remain married to Zipporah. So halachically, it all checks out. And Moshe knew this. And Moshe could have responded and could have made it very clear to Zimri in front of the entire nation of Israel that he had every right to be married to Zipporah, while Zimri had no right to marry Cosby. So why didn't he respond? That's what we want to talk about. If he had the answer, why wasn't he able to, or why didn't he just give the answer publicly, show that he knows what he's talking about, show Zimri that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and end of story. If somebody tries to debate you, if someone tries to challenge you on something that you are an authority on, and you know your stuff, you know the answers, and you know they're wrong and you are right, you're not just going to let them get away with it, especially if there's an audience. You're going to want to prove your point and prove that this individual is completely wrong, and that you have evidence and the proof and the reason and the logic why your opinion is right and their opinion is wrong. Just as an ego thing, but also as a when someone says something that you know is completely inaccurate, you want to correct them. You want to set the record straight. That's usually the natural instinct or inclination of a human being. So why didn't Moshe do that? Why didn't Moshe choose to answer? In fact, by not answering Zimri, maybe he made it worse. Maybe by not answering, he was giving Zimri the sense that he's right. And by not answering, everyone who wanted to follow Zimri and also be with one of the Midianite girls or the Moabite girls were able to go ahead and while they're at it, worship the Baal Peor. And unfortunately, many did. So maybe by not answering, he was confirming that Zimri had a point. So what is the answer? What was Moshe's silence reflecting? Moshe is not someone who talks face to face to God, is not someone who we would think would ever be tongue-tied and silenced just by a challenge that obviously has an answer. So what we want to talk about now is the idea of the dominance in a conversation. Some people call it gaslighting. Until I was preparing for this class, to be honest, I didn't know what the word gaslighting really meant. I hear it all the time, but I didn't really know what gaslighting meant. I do know what bullying means, and I do know what it means for someone to try to establish dominance in a conversation. In fact, in psychology, there's a concept of parent, adult, child when it comes to conversations. That sometimes people try to talk to you as if they're a parent to put you in child mode, put you in defensive mode, and then you sort of lose your footing. You lose your sense of ability to respond, in your full self because this person is challenging. And the trick is to, or let's say sometimes somebody goes into child mode. In other words, they go into this like sense of defensiveness or innocence, and they basically put the other person in the conversation into parent mode. It's just like a seesaw that seems to happen. And the trick is to try to get both of you into adult mode where you're both able to be your full selves and have a healthy, mature conversation. But putting that aside for a second, Moshe was trying to establish something else, something that we often experience where the point of a conversation is nothing to do with the words that are being used in the conversation. Very often there's not just very often, but almost all the time when somebody is in a heated argument, it's not about the content of the argument or who's right and who's wrong. It's about the ego and emotional attachment to winning and dominating the debate or dominating the way this individual looks or comes off as the knowledgeable one or the winning one or the point that they want to make. You see this a lot on these YouTube or TikTok videos where you see these influencers or these people will go ask tough questions to people, or they challenge people, or protesters or demonstrators trying to like scream or shout down people. They're not looking for an answer. They're just looking to try to throw you off yourself. So even responding to them doesn't really help. What Moshe was trying to establish here is that there are times, even when it's difficult, even when it's painful not to respond because you obviously know the answer and you know that they're wrong, but there are times when not answering is a stronger message and a stronger response in order to maintain your own dignity. Let's see how the Rebbe puts it. We do not always seek to answer the question of others. Sometimes their question can be so impertinent as to make a Midianite seem permitted. In other words, like sometimes the question is so off base that by answering it, you're validating the question just by even trying to answer it. What's the term they say? I'm not going to. Right, of course, I forgot the term now. I'm not going to validate that question with an answer. There's a way it's said, I forgot. But basically, when someone asks a crazy question, like I'm not going to validate that, make that question even sound like a normal question by even trying to answer it. So when the other person honestly intends to, for the sake of heaven, we must answer, according to King Solomon, he writes, we must answer even a fool according to their foolishness. But if the other person poses a question in Torah terms with intention of permitting what the Torah forbids, we must take the approach of do not answer a fool according to their foolishness. So King Solomon has two statements. Shlomo HaMelech has two statements in Mishlei and Proverbs. One where he says you should answer a fool according to their foolishness, and the other one says don't answer a fool according to their foolishness, which seems contradictory. So let's make sense of it. Victory is achieved over such an opponent by not engaging in rational debate, but by displaying a logic-defying strength. So in the beginning of this conversation, we talked about the bully and the victim. And when I say bully and victim, I'm not talking about the campaign, the national campaign against bullying. I'm not talking about physical bullying. I'm talking about a simple conversation where one individual is trying to dominate the other by throwing them off by like demeaning them in a sense, trying to like get them become irresponsive. And by responding, they strengthen the bully and showing the bully that they're getting somewhere. They're actually, you're hurting me, you're You're having an effect on me. And then when the bully sees that, the bully sees he's winning, he or she's winning. They go on, on the higher offensive because now they're dominating even more. So, what is the response to such a situation? And here Moshe is teaching us the first thing we have to do when faced with this, we have to go back into ourselves. We have to look into ourselves to reestablish who we are and know who we are. And that's achieved through silence. Because when we're silent, we're not, it's not even about, like in the case that I brought up in the beginning of the class about the way this lecturer was sort of throwing the bully back, throwing it back at the bully by saying, yeah, you're right, I am an idiot sometimes, or yeah, I do stupid things, and I'll still love, yeah, that's great. But sometimes the first thing you have to do in order to survive such conversations, in order to handle these types of things, is to be so internal with yourself and knowledgeable about what it is that you stand for and who you are, that nobody has the ability to question your own validity. It's a sense of self-awareness and self-purpose that cannot be questioned or challenged by anybody else. And that's what Moshe was trying to establish with his silence by saying you're not going to invalidate my marriage. You're not going to invalidate anything. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that I'm steadfast. I'm not going to run away, but I'm also not going to respond to you. Because right now, this is about me and making sure that I am whole, as a demonstration to us of how we first have to respond to these things by making sure that we are whole and that we are not just secure and confident, but we understand and we have a sense of appreciation of who we are and why we're here and how no one else could take that away from us. And once we do that, then whatever response we give, it doesn't matter because we are not threatened by the dominance of the other person trying to undermine us. So let's go to King Solomon for a second. So we have two contradictory statements. One is that don't answer a fool according to his foolishness, and then answer a fool according to his foolishness. So here we have a 11th century commentary that says it's actually the same thing. The silence to the fool is the answer. Showing the person that there is no response because you are right now not accomplishing anything. You're not achieving anything. You're not saying anything. There's no point to what you're talking about. You're useless. In other words, you're not even having a conversation. So the silence is the answer. So Shlomo HaMelech is actually repeating himself and being redundant versus being contradictory. He's saying, answer the fool according to his foolishness, and don't answer the fool according to his foolishness. Answer the fool is with the silence, and don't answer is the instructions that by not answering, that's how you answer. The silence is more powerful than anything you could say by showing that you're not going to engage in a conversation where the entire purpose of the conversation is to demean another person. Your content of what you're trying to say is useless, is meaningless. You want to tell me Jewish people don't have a right to exist, or Jewish people don't live in Israel, or never lived in Israel, or you want to tell me that I'm not like I'm not even going to respond to you. There is no conversation to be had, and by not responding, that is how we communicate that message. It's not weakness; it's actually strength, and that's what Moshe was trying to establish. These are the two statements from Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon, and Proverbs. Do not answer a fool according to his or her folly, lest you become like them, and answer a fool according to their folly, lest you be wise in their sight. So, in other words, don't engage with them, and the silence is the answer. Silence to them is the answer. Now, if someone has a legitimate question and wants to learn and wants to understand, by all means, they should be answered, and you should engage them. The moment you realize they're just trying to trip you, trying to throw you off course, or invalidate you, or challenge your existence, or challenge your marriage, or challenge things that you're not leaving up to them to challenge, it's silence. So Moshe wasn't responding not to demonstrate to all the people about what the answer to the question is, because it wasn't really being posed to him. It was being a statement. What he was doing is he was using this as a teachable moment and as an opportunity to teach us how to respond to the haters, how to respond to the gaslighters, how to respond to the bullies that you do not engage, you do not allow them to get in, to make any impact on you, and the silence is the response. I want to tell a quick story of the Rebbe. Before he became Rebbe, he was sent by the previous Rebbe to many Jewish communities to engage with the Jewish leaders about, this is like before World War II, to combat communism and to be able to overcome the challenges that communism was presenting to the Jewish community. It was very unfortunate because there was also a Jewish Communist Party that was torturing and persecuting the Jewish people, and they had to fight back against their own. They had to fight back against the Jewish communists as well as the communism as a whole, because it was a huge threat to the Jewish community. So the Rebbe would travel to these different communities and meet with the leaders, or the leaders of those communities. So in one town that had many Torah scholars, the Rebbe came to the yeshiva where the leader of that community resided, and he was waiting outside for his appointment to meet with this Jewish leader. Now, this was not a Chabad institution or even a Hasidic institution. It was what we know as a Litvish institution, where they oppose the Hasidic movement and oppose Chabad, and they also feel like Chabad doesn't study Talmud, doesn't know Talmud. So many of the students decided to poke fun at the Rebbe and start asking him questions on Talmud as if, like, there's no way you know the answer to these. And the Rebbe was silent. He didn't answer. So they assumed, oh, we got him. He doesn't know. He doesn't look. These Chabad Hasidim, they don't know Talmud. They don't know how to study Torah. So, but he was quiet. He just looked at them and smiled, didn't respond. Then, when its time came to meet with the Rosh Yeshiva, the leader, he went in and he met, and he came out and he left. The Rosh Yeshiva came outside later and told those students that were belittling the Rebbe, by the way, you should know he answered every single one of your questions in order, perfectly, with the sources, with every single detail. So they asked him, so why didn't he answer us? The student said, why did he remain silent? So the Rosh Yeshiva said, I asked him that. He said, because until he met with me, he was on a mission to meet with me about, for his father-in-law, for the previous Rebbe, he was there to represent his father-in-law and accomplish his mission. So until he accomplished his mission, he did not want to engage in any debate or any conversations, and especially because he saw you were coming at it from a belittling kind of way and not in a knowledgeable kind of way. So then I asked him, so why are you answering in the first place? Why don't you just take Shlomo HaMelech's advice and don't answer at all? So the Rebbe responded, because I don't want to leave off by anyone thinking that in Chabad we don't know how to study Torah. We don't know how to study Talmud. So there's always a way to handle and respond to challenging or demeaning questions. The first thing is to establish, if someone's trying to undermine you or demean you or hurt you, the first thing is to have silence. That's the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching. Be quiet. Don't answer. Don't try to answer, because there's no winning this argument. So when they come at it with anti-Israel or anti-Semitism or whatever it is they come, don't try. Even if you have the answer, even if they're using logic in their arguments and you have an answer, don't. Because by doing that, you're validating the question and you're engaging yourself and you're falling into their trap. Like Shlomo HaMelech warns, do not answer them lest you become like them. However, once there's an individual that actually wants to have an intellectual conversation, you could actually have a interesting and intellectual debate and learn a lot from those conversations. So an interesting point from the Talmud is, they sought to suppress the book of Proverbs, the book of Mishlei, too, because its statement contradicts each other. What is a statement? It says it's written, answer not a fool according to their folly. And then the other one, it says, answer a fool according to their folly. And as we explained before, the answer is silence. What does Rashi say? The idea contained in these two verses is explicit within them. Do not answer him or her in a manner where answering will only bring you down to the level. Answer a fool in a matter where, if you do not answer them, they will be wise in their own eyes. In other words, the silence is the answer. So Moshe wasn't just giving us advice on how to deal with difficult conversations, but he was also giving us spiritual advice. Because sometimes the voices or the demeaning voices are in our own heads. Sometimes within ourselves we have what's called the evil inclination, but the evil inclination comes in many forms. The evil inclination could want to convince us to do something we're not supposed to do. But the evil inclination could also try to demean ourselves and make us feel bad about ourselves and make us feel depressed, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, that any sense of any form of depression or any form of laziness or feeling down, um, even if it's for spiritual matters, is coming from the evil inclination, because those feelings prevent you from fulfilling your mission. So anything that prevents you from doing a mitzvah, anything that prevents you from being who you are, is coming from a negative force. It's coming from the Yetzer Hara, from the evil inclination, which in this case is that Zimri, that individual that's across you and trying to demean you, trying to undermine you, trying to invalidate. So what's the response to this little voice in our own heads that tries to hurt us and tries to demean us, tries to make us feel useless, or tries to make us feel unworthy or invalid? What is the mistake that we make with that inner voice? Same mistake we make sometimes with those that we're debating online or on social media or in person as a bully or whatever. Sometimes we engage that voice in our heads. We try to reason with that voice, whether the voice is trying to give us, tell us to do something wrong. So we say, well, I'm not going to do that, but maybe I'll do this. Or like, in other words, the voice tries to sometimes convince us to do more than we possibly can, so it's tire us out. So we reason with that voice. And when the voice tries to demean us or invalidate us, sometimes we reason with that too, or we have to prove ourselves wrong. Sorry, we have to prove that voice wrong. No, I'm gonna show everyone, I'm gonna show the world who I really am. What Moshe is teaching us is that sometimes we have to be silent. Ignore it. Don't even engage that voice, because by engaging it, you're allowing it to fester in your head. The fact that you have to respond to that voice, even in your own head or with your own actions, you're validating that voice, which allows it to fester, allows it to grow, and allows it to become part of your imagination and part of your thought. And what you really need is for that, even the first instance of that voice, to go away and dissipate. So it's not that we have to respond with validation. I'm a good person, or God created me, and I have a soul, and I have a unique mission and purpose. Those are good things to say, but not as a response to this negative voice. That negative voice should never have the ability to have a conversation with us. And the moment it tries, silence is the answer. Shlomo says, as Moshe demonstrates. So when Zimri comes to us and tries to convince us of something that we did wrong, or we're a bad person, or something from our past that is pulling us down and making us feel terrible, or whether it's guilt or whatever it is, the first response has to be silence. Because with silence, we can go back into ourselves and not even let that voice have a voice, and focus on who we are, what we need to do, and not from a point of countering the negativity, but from a point of growth and strength and truth of who we really are. And that's why it was so important for the Torah to tell us a story about how Moshe was silent, not as a don't forget, the whole Torah is named for Moshe. Torah is Moshe, the 5 books of Moses. So it's not about demeaning Moshe, it's about showing this lesson about how we deal with those voices, how we deal with the negativity, whether it's coming from another person or if it's coming from ourselves. And here's an example. When the evil inclination comes, namely the heretic, to seduce a person with his or her deceitful claims, the Torah says, do not answer a fool according to their folly. For if you reply, they will overpower you with a never-ending stream, even more corrupt and twisted questions. These conversations don't end because they're not about logic. They're about dominance, even the voices in our own head. So we have to recognize that it exists within us. As it says in Tanya, that if you're davening, you're praying, and you have evil thoughts or negative thoughts, don't be upset that you have those thoughts, because look at it as if there's a person outside of you that is trying to distract you, and you just have to ignore them. Don't be upset that those thoughts exist in your head, because God gave us an evil inclination to challenge us and to make us stronger. So instead of engaging, let's ignore it. And that's what Moshe is teaching us by being quiet. Another way to look at it, and this goes back to how we deal with those tough arguments and those tough conversations that are not based on logic, but based on dominance and emotions. So as we can divide the misguided people into 2 categories. There are those who seek out logic of a mitzvah, but so long as they do not yet understand it, they view it as odd and ridicule Hashem's command. So basically, in other words, there are people who challenge Torah, they challenge Judaism, they challenge who you are, and unless they fully understand it, they're going to ridicule it. Only once they understand the reason will they accept it and act accordingly. But this is a wrong-headed way and a foolish behavior. But nonetheless, the Shlomo HaMelech advises that you should answer according to their folly. In other words, at least try to reason. This is a different opinion than what we said before, but this is one opinion. I am wise, I am sophisticated about each mitzvah I do, and unlike those who blindly believe everything I do, and they don't understand why. So there are those who like to say, in fact, this is unfortunately in some communities, that they only want to do the mitzvahs that make sense to them and that make them feel good and that make them feel enriched. The problem with that is that if it's all based on your own logic could change because we're human and human beings don't just work off of logic. We work off of emotions all too often, and therefore everything is subject to change. So unless we're following the Torah and mitzvahs, we're following our principles and our guidelines based on what God wants us to do versus what we want to do, then we know that we're on the track that is beyond logic and beyond question and beyond any sense of doubt. However, there's another much worse form of corruption wherein the question of the logic of the mitzvah is not about trying to understand, but it's about destroying the practice of the mitzvah and to mock them. And they present the challenge as an innocent question, only to hide their intentions from question. In other words, they're using it as a question to not to understand the question, but to challenge your whole existence and challenge your whole validation. And over here, this is where he says that Shlomo Melech is saying, don't even try to answer. So here there is a way to explain the two contradicting verses in two different situations. But Rashi earlier clarifies that it actually means to answer the fool with silence, what Shlomo Melech is saying. Either way, these voices in our head or these individuals that try to undermine us or demean us, do not engage them. Follow Shlomo HaMelech's rule and follow Shlomo Melech's rule as well as Moshe's example by being quiet. First, strengthen ourselves, validate ourselves, and do not let any outsider, any outside influence or negative force challenge or undermine us or demean us in a sense where we start questioning who we are and what we are. That's the first most important foundational piece of what it means to be a whole person. I'm not going to read this text. This is just about, once again, the same type of conversationalists or same type of answering. And according to Shlomo HaMelech, there are two ways to deal with these situations. One is where you answer, but you answer according to the foolishness. You do not engage them on their level. You do not try to answer based on the way you understand it. You just try to satisfy them enough so they can hurt you or they can't get under your skin. But ultimately, we go according to Rashi, where it's do not answer at all, remain silent, because that way you're able to strengthen yourself, and that's the best answer you can give to a foolish conversation. Here we have silence is the best response to the power struggle behind a dishonest challenge. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us. We have our key points here, that Zimri's challenge to Moshe was not a logical or halachic challenge, it was just a demeaning challenge. And Moshe taught us how to deal with those types of individuals or those types of conversations with silence, as well as the voice in our head, not to allow it to demean us or undermine us or to take us off track or invalidate us. We should always just remain silent, not even engage it, not even validate it, and focus on what we have to do and what we want to do and what Hashem wants us to do. So good Shabbos, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And may we all be able to be strengthened and confident in who we are as Jews and overcome the challenges that we face together.
It's really.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Zio, thanks. It was great.
Thank you.